Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we talk about each and every week the decentralized revolution, how the world is changing right before our very eyes. Of course, we look at it through the lens of politics, finance, and technology. Now, look, before we dig into this show, I just want to say this. I should probably reiterate it every single show because we talk a lot about bad things, things that are scary, things that are worrisome, things that lead to massive uncertainty in this world. And it can lead to a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness and why even bother? I see all the comments. I love the comments. Keep sending them to me. Hit me up on social media at @1MarkMoss. Let me know you're listening to the show. Let me know your concerns, your questions, so I can address those here. But I see them. I see these comments coming in, and people are demoralized. Why should I even bother? I can't get ahead. I don't stand a chance. I can't change the system, and on and on and on. I see this all the time. And so what I just want to reiterate, my perspective, and I want your perspective to be, is that we're not victims. We can build the world we want, but we just have to do it. We have to be intentional about it. And so I don't go through all these news stories and headlines and tell you what's going on in the world to scare you. I don't do it to demoralize you. Certainly not. That's what they're trying to do. They want to demoralize you. What I'm trying to do is empower you. I want to educate you. I want to motivate you. I want to show you what's happening and then provide context so it helps you to understand what's going on in the world today. More importantly, where the world is going. And even more importantly than that, what you should be doing about it. All right? So look, a lot of people, one of my guests I had on recently, a lot of you didn't like that guest. I'm talking about Ryan Daniel Moran. A lot of you accused him of being that, proverbial ostrich with his head in the sand. And sometimes I wish I was that person. I've had that thought before. In the famous movie The Matrix, if you're too young to have watched The Matrix, then you should still go watch it because it's one of those classics. But that's where this red pill came from. And Morpheus offered Neo a red pill or a blue pill, and he woke him up out of the Matrix, and he offered Neo this red pill or blue pill, and he said, if you take the red pill, you're going to remember everything. You're going to know what's happening, and you're going to deal with that. If you take the blue pill, you'll forget everything. You'll go back to sleep like nothing ever happened. And sometimes I wish I didn't have the red pill. Sometimes I wish I didn't know this, but you can't unsee it once you've seen it. And there are a lot of people that go through life oblivious to this, and they're just living their best life, and they have no idea what's going on. And so sometimes it's like maybe that'd be the preferable way. But I like to say that the ostrich with his head in the sand is still going to get eaten. It doesn't help it. It doesn't protect it. Ayn Rand would say that you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of reality. And so we don't want to be oblivious. We want to know what's going on. We want to pay attention, but not just so we know and we get all stressed out and we get all worried about it. No. People say that knowledge is power, but that's not true. Knowledge with action is power. Actionable knowledge is power. Otherwise, rather have ignorance as bliss, I suppose. If you're not going to do anything about it, then why even know the information in the first place? What is the serenity prayer? God, give me peace over the things I can control and let go of the things I can't. Something like that, right? And it's like, what can we control? Like, if I can control it, if I can do something about it, then I want to know. And if I can't, then maybe ignorance is bliss. But I know, you're watching this. You're red-pilled. I'm Morpheus. You're Neo. I've given you the red pill. You've woken up. So now what? Are you just going to sit there and be worried about it? You're going to be scared about it? Or are you going to do something about it? And so, as I like to kind of repeat over and over and over, in the words of one of our founding fathers, Samuel Adams, is that we need to spread these brush fires. That's what he said, right? Spread the brush fires in the minds of men. That means listen to this, but then think about it. Discuss it. Discuss it with your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your kids, your coworkers, your neighbors, your friends. Talk about it. Discuss these ideas. Wrestle with them. Get to know them. Talk them down into first principles. Ask why. What happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? Second, third, fourth, fifth order thinking. Discuss them. Wrestle with them. Get to know them. That's how we change. So it's not about just talking about a bunch of bad things. It's about understanding what's going on so we can navigate this. And not just navigate it, but we can take advantage of, we can thrive on this. All problems, or I should say, not all, but solutions are supposed to come to problems. And I say supposed to because today in this fiat money world that we live in, where trillions of dollars are being created, and pretty much in the developed world, in the United States and Europe, et cetera, in the developed world, Canada, et cetera, Australia, we've pretty much taken care of every basic need and every problem. And so now people are creating new problems, right? No, you didn't call me by the right pronoun. I'm all angry about it. I can tell you in a third world country, they don't care. There's nothing you can say to somebody in a third world country that's going to offend them because they have bigger problems to worry about. They're trying to figure out, how to not get killed by their government for not putting some, face mask on, or they're trying to figure out how to get a meal or not have their kids die of hunger. Real problems. But, in the United States, Canada, Australia, the world, Western developed world, et cetera, we're just creating problems. And even more importantly, like I said, with this fiat money system creating trillions of dollars, now it's trying to solve problems that don't need to be solved. We don't need to figure out a way to regulate people, to call people by their pronouns. We don't need to solve that. That's not a problem that needs to be solved. But we do have problems. We do have big, big problems. And we are supposed to have solutions come to these problems, and that creates opportunity. So no matter what's happening, no matter what problem we have, there's opportunities that are created because of those problems. And even better for you and I, if we have our eyes open and we're paying attention, the bigger the problem, then the bigger the opportunity. So don't look at this as like, oh my gosh, I'm scared, I'm demoralized, I don't know what to do, I can't get ahead, I can't get, all these bad things are happening. No. These all create opportunities for us. And so that's why we pay attention. That's why we go through the news headlines. That's why we see what's going on. That's why we look at it through the 3 areas that we talk about each and every week. We look at things through the lens of politics, finance, and technology. We look for where those 3 merge. But I don't want to talk about politics for politics' sake. I'm not going to talk about redistricting the lines and how they're going to change the Electoral College, but I will talk about the politics of the omnibus bill, for example, because that now handles not just politics, but the politics of how we manage the finance, the markets, the money, which of course then in turn, half of that $1.7 trillion went to Ukraine, which then destabilizes the entire geopolitical landscape and changes us from a centralized unipolar world to a multipolar world. So now we have all 3 of these things happening, and that's where we want to look at, and that's where we pay attention, because that's what affects our lives. That's where we have leverage. That's where we can affect change, and we can change our lives. We can position ourselves to benefit from this information. And that's why we do it. Now, like I said, I like to look at politics, finance, and technology, and the 3 really work together. It's that politics drives finance, right? They all vote, they pass a bill, let's dump $1.7 trillion in the ecosystem. So politics changes the market, the economy, the money, and then we have technology that solves the problems that the market and the politics and the system demands. And so all 3 of those work together. That's why we talk about that. The decentralized revolution, how the world is changing, how it's going from a centralized world to a decentralized world. It happens on about a 250-year time frame, like a pendulum that swings back and forth. And of course, it's always technology that changes the world the most. Technology is what reshapes the world, changes how we organize and how we manage ourselves. We're talking about Bitcoin. Not cryptocurrency, we're talking about Bitcoin. All the other 20,000 cryptocurrencies are trying to solve something else. Bitcoin solved decentralization. And it's changing the world from a centralized world to a decentralized world. Now, I've been talking about Bitcoin publicly since it was $500. I started making videos, I think, when Bitcoin was around $700 or $1,000. I was talking about buying Bitcoin at $50,000 and at $60,000. And I've seen comments from you guys saying, oh, Mark, you were talking about buying Bitcoin at $50,000. Now it's $16,000. I said, yeah. And I was also talking about it at $1,000. And I'll be talking about it when it's at $1.2 million. Now, I do think that the price is one of the least interesting aspects of a new technology, any new technology, because it's the technology that's going to change the world that's important. Facebook stock is down 75%. Does that mean Facebook doesn't work anymore? No, Facebook still works perfect. And so just because Bitcoin's price is down, does it mean it's not censorship resistant, immutable money that's peer-to-peer that gets you out of the grip of these centralized institutions? No, it still works perfectly. It's still censorship resistant. It's still immutable. It's still money that I can control that nobody can manipulate. It's still digital cash. It's still digital gold. It's still a Swiss bank account in my pocket. It's still all those things, just like Facebook still works fine when the stock is down 75%. The network is growing. The development on the network is growing, and the price will take care of itself, and the price is rallying hard. As a matter of fact, Bitcoin has been in this very tight band for quite some time. As a matter of fact, it's it's known for its volatility, how much the price swings up and down. And we've been kind of joking about Bitcoin. It's been in such this tight price range that it's almost like this stable coin, so to speak. But not anymore. We got some fireworks. Bitcoin is moving. Bitcoin has been in this $15,000, $16,000 price range all the way back to November of last year. And it is popped. It's come up. As a matter of fact, we did see a little kind of breath of hope in December when it got up to about 18,000. Quickly got back down into 16,000 again. But now it is up. We've seen Bitcoin has popped almost 20%. If we go back to kind of where it really met its low was about 15.5 in November, and we have Bitcoin is up 22% since that time. 22%. Now, that's at a time when, the NASDAQ and the Dow and everything else is still down. And when Bitcoin moves, lots of other things start moving. So look at this. I mean, there's some big moves here. We got Coinbase, which is probably the oldest and the largest Bitcoin place to buy Bitcoin, Coinbase. They are a publicly traded company. It's the ticker COIN, and they are up 44% on the move. And that's in, that's the daily. I mean, that's in just a couple of days. That's since January 6th. So in the last week or so, the Coinbase stock is up almost 50%. So when Bitcoin moves up 20%, Coinbase stock jumped up almost 50%, and it gets even better. Now, there's a couple publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies. One of them is called Riot, R-I-O-T is their ticker. And just in the last couple of days, we've seen that, just with Bitcoin pump as well. Since just in the last week, we've seen Riot jump up 88%. Boom. That's a big one. Now, obviously, it's still way down. Don't get me wrong. If you had bought in at the top, you're down. But if you got in at the bottom of this Bitcoin bounce, you're up almost 100%. You've almost doubled your money in a week, and that's not to be outdone. Mara is another really big Bitcoin mining company. Now, the reason why Bitcoin mining moves much bigger than Bitcoin is the same reason why gold miners move much more than gold. If gold goes from whatever it is, $1,700, $1,800 an ounce to $2,000 an ounce, cool, it went up $200. But if I'm a gold miner with 100 million ounces in the ground, so I went from 100 million ounces times $200 is different, and same with the Bitcoin miners, it gives you leverage over that. We saw Mara pump up 120%. You've more than doubled your money if you were holding on to one of these miners. It's good to see some life coming back into the space. We need the Bitcoin mining in the ecosystem, and it's important to have that. Now, as Bitcoin, and I've been talking about this for a while, calling 16,000 the bottom. Of course, we don't know the bottom until we're looking backwards on it, but there's dozens of reasons why I think it's the bottom. I will say I do believe it's the bottom. However, if, and this is an if the markets overall, the Dow, the NASDAQ, et cetera, if the markets crash again and we see another 30 to 50% drawdown, like a lot of people think we might, then Bitcoin might also drop again. It might. The larger macro picture is certainly at play here, but there's no certainty of that. Now, with this, like I said, the entire system is coming back to life, and we saw El Salvador, which, of course, as a nation, was the first nation to adopt Bitcoin as a legal tender. I've been down there in El Salvador many times, and it's pretty cool. You can go around spending your Bitcoin all around town. It's really cool. It's brought a lot of hope. It's brought a lot of prosperity to El Salvador, and they have a goal to pay back their debt by raising money in Bitcoin. They're calling it a volcano bond. And they had originally wanted to put this volcano bond into place in November of 2021. The problem is that between the Bitcoin price selling off, they decided to kind of hold that back. They wanted to raise $1 billion in these Bitcoin-backed bonds. So they wanted to launch it in March of 2022. They postponed it, but the digital assets bill was finally introduced to the Legislative Assembly at the end of November 2022, and they just passed it. 62 people voted for it, 16 people voted against it, but it went through. And what they're going to do is they're going to create a new token, a digital token that you could buy, that you're basically buying into the debt. Now, when you buy, they're raising this $1 billion to pay down its sovereign debt, because they're on the hook with the IMF, which doesn't like their Bitcoin operations. They want to take money to start mining Bitcoin in El Salvador on the volcano, hence the name Volcano Bomb. And they want to fund the construction of a new Bitcoin city in El Salvador, which is going to be pretty cool. So it's cool to see that going, and this is exactly how the world changes, through competition. We need to see countries trying other things. Let them mine Bitcoin on their volcano, sell a volcano bond, build out a city, attract new people, attract new investment capital, more entrepreneurs. And if other nations see them doing that, there's a lot of other places that have volcanoes. Maybe they'll do it. And they'll say, well, we have a volcano. We can do it here. Why don't you guys come here? And we'll start to see the world reshift. Remember, technology is what changes the way the world organizes. This is very exciting stuff. If you're not paying attention, hopefully you are now. While the world is rapidly changing, the economy is struggling. And I know a lot of people are concerned with this. We saw massive layoffs happening everywhere. Amazon laid off like 17,000 people. Layoffs are happening. Businesses are falling. And at the same time, prices are escalating. We've been talking about this inflation for a long time. I've talked about it over and over and over. It's a big deal. And supposedly, it was transitory, right? Supposedly, they told us that it would be transitory, it'd just be going away, it was just temporary. And now, of course, they're celebrating it, right? We see the Federal Reserve and the government coming out and, all right, we brought prices down. We got them from 9% down to 7% inflation, which doesn't really tell the truth at all. As a matter of fact, we saw this week, big news went around. You might have seen that the cost of eggs has completely skyrocketed. Now, I've heard from a lot of you that in your store, a lot of times you can't even get the eggs. So there's egg shortages happening everywhere. And of course, supply and demand. Prices aren't hard to figure out. All you got to do is look at supply and demand. So if there's not enough eggs to meet the demand for the eggs, what happens? Prices go up, shortages happen, things like that. And that's exactly what happens. We've seen that it's really taken a dent into household budgets. I posted on my Instagram account a chart of the eggs. I mean, it looks like this hockey stick going straight up. And it was like, if you'd invested in eggs 2 years ago, you'd be a millionaire, something like that. Of course, you'd have a bunch of rotten eggs as well. But it's just interesting to show you how fast that's gone up. And we saw that just in December alone, the price of eggs went up 60%. 60% from the year earlier, which is a pretty big deal. So everyone's, praising themselves for getting inflation down, but yet here eggs are going through the roof. And like I said, in some states, it's hard to even find them. The problem with this inflation is that it steals your wealth. It steals your life. It steals your purchasing power. So you used to be able to buy a dozen eggs for whatever, half an hour of work, and now it takes, let's say, 1 hour of work. Obviously, it's not that much. I think it's $4 or eggs was $4.25 last month. So $4.25. I don't buy eggs. My wife goes to the store. So I'm not tuned into the price of eggs, but about $4 for eggs. So let's say that it took you 25% of an hour to buy eggs, and now it takes you 50% of an hour. Either way, you have to work more. You have to give up more of your lifetime, your life energy to buy those same eggs. So by inflation going up, they've stole your life. But even worse than that. So it says here that some store owners in New York, a grocery store owner, Jose Philippe, said that he's seen customers change their spending habits. He says here, quote, "I've seen customers gravitate from buying organic eggs now to more conventional eggs or non-organic." So basically what people are doing is now they're not buying as many eggs and they're eating something else in its place. non-organic eggs. Maybe they're going back to their carb load and sugar load in the morning or whatever it is. But so not only does it steal your life where you have to work more hours just to get the same thing, it's stealing the quality of your life. Now you're going from organic eggs to non-organic eggs. So now you're eating chickens that are being fed seed oils and grains that are GMO, and that ain't good for you. My good friend Dr. Joe McCullough, one of the leading doctors in the world on holistic or functional medicine, he says one of the number one problems, one of the number one things you can do for your health is to cut out seed oils. And he said chicken is really bad because they eat all of this seed oil. And so you want organic chicken. You want organic eggs. But nope, you're just going to go buy the cheap eggs, or you're going to substitute, like I said, with carb overload, sugar overload in the morning. And think about what that does to your health. So not only does it steal your life, your time, it steals your quality of life and your health. And while they're praising that inflation is going down, I've been very vocal on my main YouTube channel. Just search Mark Moss on YouTube. I make a bunch of videos, a couple videos a week. And I've been very vocal talking about how I believe that inflation could be still some of the lowest we'll see for the rest of the decade. So while inflation is down a little bit for now, I don't believe it's peaked for the decade. So I still think it's going to go higher. And as a matter of fact, I saw this article said 7 reasons that high inflation isn't likely to go away anytime soon. And of course, what's high inflation to you, right? What's high inflation? 5% is high inflation. It's supposed to be 2%, which is high. It should be 0. The government wants it to be 2. So at 5%, it's still more than 100%, 150% over what their goal is. I would consider that high. And of course, they've constantly changed the way they measure inflation. In this article, it says that more than two-thirds of the economists at big financial institutions surveyed by the Wall Street Journal say that inflation is likely to remain high. And then if you go back and you measure inflation the exact same way, the exact same measurement they did in 1980, it actually would put inflation at 15.23% instead of what the government claimed as 7.1%. So they constantly change it. So let's just go back to the way they measured it then, because they're supposedly measuring it, right? It's the highest it's been in 40 years. Well, but they keep changing it. So if we just go back and measure it the way they did 40 years ago, or not even 40 years ago, just in the 80s, 40 years ago. If we go back and measure it that way, man, I'm old. I didn't realize how long that was. But if we go back and measure it that way, we're not just the highest we've ever been, we're way higher. It wasn't 7%, it was 15%. Now, of course, I've mentioned all the time Milton Friedman. He says that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, meaning that inflation is always caused by government overspending. Now, if we look at it from that perspective, it's always caused by government overspending. Well, then we just have to look at the government spending. Is the government spending going to go down, or are they going to go up? Did they just pass a $1.7 trillion omnibus bill? Did they just have this debt ceiling limit increase where they said, let's not even have a ceiling anymore, let's just have unlimited debt? So do you think that spending goes down? Because that's what's driving inflation. And in 2021, Politico profiled a former U.S. Federal Reserve member and noted that between 2008 and 2014, the Federal Reserve printed more than $3.5 trillion in new bills. That was triple the amount of money that the Fed created in its first 95 years of existence. That's how fast. And so will they spend less? Now we have, here's a couple of reasons they gave. One, COVID overspending continues. So there's still relief bills. We're still in a state of emergency. President Biden just extended that another 90 days. Number two, Democrats and Republicans recently went on to even more inflationary spending binges. So these infrastructure bills, the CHIP bill, and now, of course, this big omnibus bill. Number three, Build Back Better, bankrupt, shoveled yet more out of the door for years to come. So we spent all this money on these jobs that were supposed to be ready and bring money back in the economy. That's not there. Number four, federal officials are destroying people's trust. I'm not sure what that has to do with inflation. And number five, why it will continue is because the U.S. government is bankrupt. And they need to continue printing money. We have $31 trillion of debt. We're running a $2 trillion deficit. Now with the omnibus bill, it's an extra $1 trillion of deficit. And so they have to continue to print money, and they use inflation to hide that they're bankrupt. So we'll continue to see inflation that way. And the number 7 reason, the one I agree with, is the very people that cause this, that did this, that pushed for this, they're still in charge. We haven't done anything to change that. And so what makes you think that they're going to spend less money? Republican or Democrat, Trump spent more money than any president before him. Biden's spending more money than Trump. Every single president, it's not Republican or Democrat. They're all going to spend more money, and they're still in charge. Looking at the world decentralizing, we're really kind of at the end, I mentioned before the break, at the end of this 100-year sovereign debt bubble. And what happens is at the end of a civilization, the world starts breaking apart. The world starts breaking down. That's what happens. Just look at the fall of the Roman Empire or any other empire, the fall of the USSR Empire, etc. And these nation states, they get too big, they get too much debt, they get too much decadence, and they collapse. There's been several pieces of work done where they talk about like kind of the lifespan of an empire or a democracy is about 250 years. There's about 6 or 8 stages that it goes through before it eventually collapses. In the fourth turning, they've highlighted the kind of like 4 cycles, and so we'll talk about 4 instead of 8. And it's you've heard me mention it many times, and other people as well, which is like hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and then those weak men create hard times, and then it repeats. Hard times create the strong men, and so when you think about it like that, these good times created weak men, and the weak men have created really hard times now. And so society starts breaking down. Everything, all the hard work, the hard times that created the hard work, that created all the prosperity, then lead to decadence, and then it leads to if you go through the 8 stages, then it leads to academia, where people just want to spend their time in think tanks and philosophy and teaching. It's non-productive, right? Then it leads to decadence, where you're spending $68 million on a digital JPEG, or $18 million on digital invisible art, right? Or $300 million on a yacht, right? So it leads to decadence. And then it leads to dependence, right? So now we have this rise of the UBI and all these things. And what happens is we don't reinvest into the things that got us into success, and so that's kind of where we're at today. We don't have the skilled workers. We're not building the manufacturing. We're not servicing the equipment we have, and we can see it happening all over. This week, we saw 2 massive problems in the infrastructure that runs this country. Just like the fall of the USSR, just like the collapse of Rome, the infrastructure breaks down. We saw Amtrak, the train. There was a train that was delayed for 37 hours with passengers on it, and the passengers started to call 911 over fears they were being held hostage. This is a real story. 37 hours stranded in South Carolina, leaving passengers so panicked they were calling 911, believing they were being held hostage. Now, look, problems happen. Things happen. Accidents happen. Things break down. It happens. But when it starts happening all the time, when it didn't used to happen, then you have to start to ask why. I've been flying for the last 20 years. I fly a lot, dozens of times a year. I've been doing it for over 20 years or 30 years now at this point, a long time. And I still fly a lot, once or twice a month. And I can tell you that, and I've been telling my kids over like the last 2 years, because they're always so mad every time our flight's delayed, which is basically all the time now. You pretty much can't fly without a flight being delayed anymore. And I said, kids, pay attention to this, because this is the breakdown of society. Remember how planes didn't used to, and notice how it's happening more and more, and we're trying to draw their attention. So if it happens, right? I mean, there's a million reasons why it can happen, but when it happens frequently, when it happens more and more, then you have to start looking at this. And that was on the train. We saw this week also over 6,400 flights were delayed. As a matter of fact, my wife and daughter were getting on a plane to fly, and they got caught up in this. They couldn't get on their flight, missed their connection flight. It was, it's this disaster for everybody. But this is the biggest disaster in flights in the United States history, right after we had just seen the previous biggest disaster in flights. And so, like I said, stuff happens, but not the biggest in history following directly after the previous biggest in history. Over 6,400 delayed flights were happened. Thousands of flights have been delayed or canceled. The Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, the government that can't do their job, the FAA announced early Wednesday morning that it had experienced a notice-to-air missions system outage. NOTAM, NOTAM system. So they had a problem. The system's breaking down. It put up some error and caused all the flights to get delayed because they had to shut it down. Well, why? What happened with that system? Why is that system breaking down? I mean, we've been running it for, I don't know, how long? How long we've been doing FAA? 60, 70, 80 years? And now it's breaking down when everything else is breaking down, when the government's breaking down, when the government has their eye on something else other than what their job is. Joe Biden orders Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg, he is responsible for the FAA. He's the transportation secretary. He's responsible for the planes and trains running on time. He's responsible for the semis and the big rigs to deliver your products and the planes and trains. That's his job. Make sure the planes and trains run on time. And under his watch, we just had the entire train system almost shut down over labor dispute. President Biden had to step in and fix his job. We've witnessed two of the largest disasters in federal aviation just in the last couple months. That's his job. We've watched supply chains break down worse than we've ever seen in history. That's his job. Now, Joe Biden orders Pete Buttigieg, Federal Aviation Administration, to turn system back on. Why does he have to be ordered by the president? What does the president even know about aviation? Why does he have to be ordered? Why can't he just do his job? The president directed DOT FAA to restore the system quickly and determine the causes. Biden's massive infrastructure bill signed just last year invests only $1 billion for 5 years to upgrade the air traffic control system. But the facilities are the nerve centers of our entire aerospace system. It's a big part of the reason why flying is the safest mode of transportation, but yet they're not investing into it. We know it's the software that caused the problem. It was an honest mistake, Pete Buttigieg says. Yeah, meanwhile, it cost businesses, employees, travelers, and the airline industry billions, tens of billions, maybe, I don't know. We don't even know how much it cost. Tens of billions of dollars. As a result of this error. It was an error. Oh, sorry, my bad. According to Joe Biden's Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a thorough investigation is required. We're going to figure it out. He says, we're going to own it. We're going to own it. Well, if you were the CEO of a corporation, you'd be fired. That's how you would own it. But he's too busy. He's too busy dealing with LGBTQ plus and things like that. As a matter of fact, Rep. Barry Moore, a Republican from Alabama, said that the shutdown is another example of if we go woke, we go broke. Because in 2021, the system, the NOTAM system, they updated the system to change the name from Notice to Airmen to be more inclusive. They upgraded the system to be more inclusive to make it Notice to Air Missions instead of Airmen, because that wasn't inclusive enough. So they spent the time and the money and the effort to change the wording to be more inclusive, but they never actually fixed the system. Per Rep. Moore, he says, we have this antiquated air system in the country. It's being subsidized by taxpayers. We paid billions of dollars out of our pockets to keep these airlines afloat, and they can't figure this out. Look, I mean, it's outrageous. Pete Buttigieg should step down in this. He should hang his head in shame for dropping the ball. He has one job, and he can't do it. But I'm not going to go on that rant. The rant is we're witnessing the end of the empire. That's what happens. They break down. They can't keep the planes running. They can't keep the trains running. And Pete Buttigieg shouldn't be able to keep his job in the face of this. At least that's what I think. You've been listening to The Mark Moss Show, talking about how the world is changing, how we're at the end of an empire, and how that signals that we are moving from a world of centralization to decentralization, how the world we're going into is not the same as the world we've left behind or we're leaving behind. Hopefully these stories make some sense. Like I said, not to scare you, but to empower you, to show you what's coming next so you can be ready and be prepared. That's what I got. Thanks so much for listening.